operating like any other auto insurer, financial cash cow, and not focusing on loss prevention. The unfinished business, of course, the unfinished business in that is right on the front burner in auto engineering design and safety. One, the highway, we have to pay more attention to highway design for safety. The second is to get that bumper back to 7 or 8 miles per hour. That's one of the great absurdities of the Reagan administration. They were asked by GM to bring the bumper standard from 5 mile an hour protective level to 2.5, and they did. And 5 miles an hour is walking speed. And they didn't even want to have a car protect against the fender, etc. at walking speed collision. That was too much strain on General Motors' resources. I keep thinking of General Motors' mark of excellence when I recall that little maneuver at the White House. That's about $2 billion a year in higher collision repair costs. Just that degradation of the airbag right there. The two big areas to get more rapid improvement are side impact and rollover. You're certainly familiar with the latter. The side impact and rollover are costing about $15,000 a year, and with small modifications, they can be very, very substantially reduced in the frequency of death and injury. Furthermore, the auto standards ought to be extended fully to light trucks and vans. Light trucks and vans weren't sold in very great numbers in 1967, so they were exempted from the standards for automobiles. They were not considered family vehicles. Now, of course, 1/3 of all the vehicles sold are light trucks and vans. In fact, a little more than 1/3. And there's no reason why they don't have the same levels of crash protection. The steering column has got to be improved in the second generation standard. Remember, most of the auto safety standards have not been upgraded since 1967. The tire standards are the same as 1967. The rearward displacement of the steering column is the same as 67. It's about time that they upgrade. Pedestrian protection. Cars are not meant to protect vehicles. They're vehicles for pedestrians. That's what you get. You got the hood ornaments, the tail fins, the sharp cutting edges over the lights. And people say, "Are you kidding? I mean, that's going to make a difference when you're hit by a car." Well, most pedestrians are hit by cars under 5 miles per hour. And that makes a whale of a difference. The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates told us the truth when he said that the human body is more likely to collide safely against a flat surface than a sharp cutting edge. He gave General Motors 2,000 years lead time. Well, the hood ornament once was on Canadian TV just when the book came out. There's no U.S. TV. So I have to go across the border. That's why I'm a fervent fan of Canadian independence. The CBC hooked me on. They had a fellow from American Motors. They couldn't get anybody from the big three. And they had a car right there. It had a big hood ornament. And I leaned over to the fellow from American Motors and said, "What's the purpose of that hood ornament from an engineering point of view?" And there was an 8-second silence, which of course is terminal on TV. So I suggested perhaps the purpose was to protect vehicles from pedestrians. Roman chariot style. The pathology slides are really quite heartbreaking. You see kids getting hit like this. Or even when the car's standing still, they're playing ball in their neighborhood and they lunge to catch the ball or something, they impale themselves on those hood ornaments or tail fins. We're talking thousands of injuries, quite serious, some of them fatal. And that's one reason why I called the car unsafe within speed. There's no reason why cars cannot be built to be pedestrian tolerant, at least at the low speeds that are involved in most pedestrian vehicle collisions. And then there's the controversial motorcycle helmet use laws. We're the only country where this is a controversy. Go to Western Europe. The controversy was how fancy the helmet's going to be, what the design is going to be. And the provinces in Canada, the same way. But we have 24 states without these laws, and about 1,000 youngsters stopped in Spokane, and a young fellow came out in a wheelchair, and he eased himself out. He sat next to me in the bulkhead, and I said, "What happened?" And he said, he was in a motorcycle crash. He didn't have a helmet, and he's paralyzed. He had to start teaching himself the ABCs. He had to teach himself how to read and count, and he wanted to be eventually go into computer work. And I said, "Well, what do you think about it now?" And when you look back on it, he said, "No one was going to tell me what to do." That's what my attitude was before the crash. No one was going to tell me what to do. He said, "Now I go around speaking to motorcycle riders, tell them what I think they should do to protect themselves as well as their families." And I think part of all of this that we're talking about is, and you know this because on the highway you take great precautions, but we're talking about one of the great traumas of our society, fourth leading cause of death, heavily focused in the under 30 age group. Far more human years lost to cancer, by the way. Just because of the age group, there are 350,000 cancer deaths a year, but more in the older age group. And because of the 47,000 deaths in the auto industry, there are far more teenagers, young kids, children, and people in their 20s. You add up the lost years of potential life expectancy, and it's more than the lost years of living cancer victims. And so that's what we're really talking about. And I think that in many ways, the attention to engineering has been a very constructive focus, because drivers, there are hundreds, some million drivers, all kinds of variety, background. Some of them are tired, sleepy, can't drive very well. Excuse me. And with a vehicle, the steering column's never going to get drunk. It's not going to have an argument with the spouse. It's not going to feel sleepy. That's what really got me to write this book, was the realization that once you engineer in a car a system, you reduce the pressure on driver adaptation, among other things, and you reduce the risk of injury, even if the crash occurred. So, apropos those little recreation spots we used to go to when we were children and get into a dodging car, the whole point of getting into a dodging car was to have a safe crash. They had a governor of 5 miles per hour, and you went around trying to bump into somebody. You had a rubber bumper. It was a lot of fun. But the engineering input is easier to administer. You only got a handful of auto companies. You don't have 100 and some billion drivers. And when you do it, it usually lasts a long time. 3 years ago, a 28-year-old man on the night shift in the factory in Georgia was driving home at 2 in the morning, and he took a shortcut, which was sort of like a dirt road. And this car, it was a 74 Oldsmobile that he bought used. And he was rounding a corner, and he rounded it too quickly, and he went right into a dirt embankment, head on, you can imagine. And suddenly an airbag inflated. He didn't know he had an airbag in the car. And the airbag inflates, and he sees this big white cloth suddenly in front of him. So he gets out of the car and starts running up the road at midnight, frightened as can be, like a ghost to come and save him. He reaches the police come with the flashlight. What's this white thing draped over a steering assembly? And he didn't have a scratch. Grandmother and 2 grandchildren, same thing, didn't know she had an airbag in the car in Florida, was crashed into by a medium-sized truck, and they walked away with very modest injuries. Now, you see, even after 17 years, 16 years, that airbag, hermetically sealed, worked just like that. Just like that. Which is an example of what durability, reliability of crash protection engineering can be all about. So that's what I have to say, and I know you have a lot to say. So I'm going to stop here, and strange organization. However, precisely because you were viewed as adherents to a lost engineering cause, you have credibility. You know, in our society, people who have credibility who move from one side to another of an issue. I mean, in our society, don't be right too long. If you're right too long, nobody will listen to you. You have to be freshly right. Or a convert. That's even better. Now, like Reagan, when you start dealing with the Russians, that was a cheat. Reagan dealing with the Russians. But if a Democrat dealt with the Russians, accused of treason. Same with Nixon in China. So I thought that you might ask yourself, what do you see the Corvair Society doing 10, 20 years from now? There are only so many Corvairs in existence, only so many times you can polish them, refine them, exchange stability control equipment. Only so many times you can install transverse leaf springs. What is there left for you to do? I was thinking about this coming out this morning, and my answer to the question, what is there left for Corvair Clubs of America, or Corvair Society of America to do, was, I don't know. But you should know. Because if you figure out what your credibility residue is, and what you can do about it, there might be a very interesting function. I do know there is one always residual purpose of your organization. That is, if we ever have an overseas enemy that desperately needs used cars and we want to do them in, now, where did I get that idea? In World War II, in Czechoslovakia, the Czechoslovakian car was called the Tatro, and it was really a car that had a great deal of difficulty adhering to the road under certain maneuvers, and it was considered the supreme act of patriotism for the Czech underground to somehow give one of these cars to the German high command. So, anyhow, I do think that you might want to ask yourself whether you want to broaden out a bit, take a stand on a certain crash-worthy safety issue, a certain standard that needs to be established. I might add, you know, to this day, NHTSA has not issued a vehicle handling standard. They've been waffling for years, and we now know that some of these Jeep-type vehicles with high centers of gravity, etc., are quite unstable. And we do need a vehicle handling standard. And that's something which I think you could speak out on with a considerable degree of authority, because you must be able to communicate the enormous strain on your driving control that some of these cars have placed you in. But for something like 25 years to pass without any vehicle safety handling standard, given the range of vehicles that are coming in from abroad here, illustrates not the lack of research. This is a very difficult area. With different degrees of motion and so on. You get very complicated with mathematics. But at least a standard that would deal with a problem like the Suzuki and other vehicles that have been coming